Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Revenue is a big factor in understanding customer value, but it isn't the only measure. There are a number of other issues that must be examined. By looking at a customer critically, we can ascertain their true value to the organization and determine the level of service they should receive. So pull out your calculators as Scott and I discuss what is your client worth and other important topics on episode 552 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
Well, this should be a good topic because I don't think a lot of salespeople or business leaders really think about how much a client is worth. And when you start measuring things, you start managing better. So we'll talk about that after we cover the book. And the book is What Great Salespeople Do. And we're going to be covering chapter 4 is Our Brains on Story. And it reminds me of that Nancy Reagan drug, with or the drug commercial, the frying pan and the egg, and this is your brain on drugs. This is your brain on drugs. It's like, all right, there's so many of our listeners that don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm grateful for you tuning in. And there's great stuff in this chapter when it talks about the brain. And I when I hear about the brain, I always think about our good friend Dr. Terry Wu and talking about left brain, right brain. And we've
should I have Terry on as a guest?
We should. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, he could really talk a lot about left brain, right brain. I mean, a fascinating. That's a
perfect
story.
time to bring him on. So
yeah. Well, we'll get him on the calendar. We'll reach out to him. So.
You know what I thought about is when talking about the brain is that famous book, Think and Grow Rich, which is the key part is think.
Oh, exactly.
So we're going to talk a lot about the brain here.
Yeah. I mean, it's not feel and grow rich. I mean, our feelings don't really bring us there.
Play video games and grow rich.
Think about it and then, take action. Things happen, but too often we get caught up in our feelings and not thought or action. So they're all very, very important. But so he talks about the left brain, right brain, and we all know, have heard that the left brain is the logical side and the emotions are on the right side of the brain. And every time that I hear that, I always think about something that I was taught many years ago as an example, and that is when you want to appeal to the logical, intellectual side of the brain, I have a saying of tell Joe. And if you want to appeal to the emotional right side of the brain, it's show Robin. And those two characters are Tell Joe, which is Joe Friday. And I know that that's a leap for a lot of people.
We're not going to get there,
Joe
Scott.
Friday.
That's
I know. And that's from Dragnet, which is a very intellectual. Okay. All right. Think of Star Trek and Spock. How's that? Getting a little closer. So very intellectual, very much matter of fact, very much by the rules. I need to come up with some new characters in today's culture.
Yeah. You're still in the 60s. You're still in the 60s.
I am. And then emotions, show Robin. Guess who that is? I think we all know who that is. That's Robin Williams. So when you're presenting information and you want it to be emotional, then you end up acting out like Robin Williams would act out, and you become convincing in that. Now those are two extremes, but think about those actions and that presentation that's going to appeal and influence the people that we're talking to. And keep in mind that when we are in a position of teaching our prospects something, we're appealing to their brain. We need to be able to educate to influence and not always educate to teach. So that's one of my sayings that I want to reiterate. And so often salespeople get caught up. Well, I need to educate my customer. Educate them on what? How about we educate them on inaction and the cost of doing nothing? So what are your thoughts on the left brain, right brain, Bill? What did you get out of this chapter?
Well, I liked he talked about reactive versus receptive. And he used the story about you go into a retail situation and you say, and somebody comes up and says, "Can I help you?" And we ought, even if we're looking for a particular thing, we say, "No, thanks, I'm just looking." And that's a reaction. And I think I did my time in retail. I did 6-7 years in retail. And I had a great guy that worked for me. He never asked, "Can I help you?" He always talked about something different, and he'd come up and he'd go, "Isn't it a great day?" And they'd go, "No, thanks. Oh, wait." And they're brain fried. And then they say, "I'm looking for this," because they came into the store looking for something. And if he didn't say, if he didn't give them the right lead in, then they didn't know what to do with their automatic answer. And
Right,
so,
right.
so I think that's one of the things that we see is if we can change the pattern for people, then they don't go into reactive mode. They tend to be more receptive. Just like my employee, when he said, "Isn't it a great day out?" or, "How about those twins?" or something
Yeah,
different
yeah.
than "Can I help you?" Then they didn't know how to answer, and they started to answer truthfully rather than just with the automatic answer. In
Mm.
in retail, we asked, "Can I help you?" with the hope that they would say, "No, thanks, I'm just looking," and then we could go back and do what we wanted to. Because the
Right.
dance, I called it the dance. The dance is, "Can I help you?" "No, thanks, I'm just looking." "Okay, if you need me, I'll be over here doing the work I want to do, and not or
Mm.
talking to my
Right.
friend or ignoring you, which is what I really
Hmm.
wanted to do when you came in."
Yeah.
So I think that's really the key to the storytelling process, is that it breaks up what we normally expect.
Yeah, I think salespeople need to think about what information do you want to know when a customer or prospect walks into the store or calls you or reaches out to you via email and you're in that conversation. What information do you want to know as a salesperson? And in a retail environment, I think a perfect question to ask somebody who walks into a store is, "So what brought you in today? What project are you working on?" I think that's one of them when it comes to the big box home improvement stores is, "What project are you working on today?" And now you're starting that conversation by seeking information that you want to know, and hopefully you're educating to influence. When you're teaching somebody how to do a project, you're working with them in a direction where you're giving them the resources, you're giving them the materials that they need in order to complete the goal that they want to accomplish. So I think that's really important in communication. I also think when it comes to the brain and influence, metaphors are very, very influential. And if you can take a new concept and introduce it to somebody with an existing association of an example, it's easy for them to be able to see the comparison of what you're proposing and what they've been through already in a metaphor. And I think metaphors are very, very powerful. I don't think that they're used as often as they should. And keep in mind that when we are talking and we are selling as salespeople and we are creating an experience, a lot of the people that we're talking to are thinking about that experience in images, which is in the right brain. They're not thinking about words. As we're sharing words, they're not thinking about the sound of the word or how it's spelled or what it looks like. They're painting a picture in their mind. And that's why storytelling is so effective. And that's why I think metaphors are so effective too.
Yeah, it reminds me of a situation I was in, and I teach public speaking, and so I run into this a lot. I use stories in public speaking and metaphors and analogies a lot in public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I was teaching at Medtronic, a great company, and it was a mixed group, it wasn't a focus group. And there was a guy in there, and my whole first day, he was saying, kind of mumbling under, "This is crap. This is crap. This is all crap." And then the next day he came back and he said, "This is great. This is just what I need. This is great." And I said, "I got to have lunch with you because I got to figure out what I did different on day 2 than day 1." So we sat down, had lunch, and I said, "So why is your attitude different today? Why do you think it's better?" He goes, "I figured you out." And I
Oh,
said, "Oh, you figured me out." I said, "What did you figure out?" He said, he was a neuroscientist. He said,
yeah.
"You want us to talk differently to people who aren't neuroscientists than we do to people who are." And I said, "That's exactly right." He goes, "We never thought of that.
What
We
a breakthrough.
What a breakthrough." And he said, my team has to get together with, at meetings and stuff and explain things, and they talk like they're talking to other neuroscientists. And we got to use these analogies and these stories in order to help them understand what we're trying to say to them before we can convince them to fund our projects. And that it was a big breakthrough. And I think that's a big breakthrough for a lot of salespeople. You want to get into all the facts and figures and statistics and, the charts and the graphs and all the things that really tend to turn people off, because as they use their stories versus statistics in the chapter, people tune out to all those things. But when they get into the story, people perk up and they start to listen more effectively. And I think that's really
Yeah.
why we have to get into the stories.
Right, right. And they talked about that a little bit in the book with the Oracle example of the CEO giving out all this information and statistics, and here's how we've changed and grown and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's looking at their phone. And then all of a sudden they switch to telling a story about his daughter, and everybody stops and they look up and go, "Oh, grab a story."
That's
And
right.
I mean,
This is
it's
interesting.
socially Yeah, it's associated with our childhood, and this was right from the book. Once upon a time, and you start a story, and all of a sudden you get into this child mode, and it's like, oh, okay, I want to hear a story. I want to learn something new via a story. Oh, fascinating, and it's the same story over and over again. So we get reaffirmed that we know what's coming up, and I think sometimes salespeople relive the same stories because they want to be able to know what's coming up versus asking questions and getting information and then using that information to include in a metaphor or an example or to find out more emotional information versus the intellectual information. I was in a coaching session yesterday, and what came to mind was a line: suspend the reaction, concentrate on the response. And it can be so easy for salespeople to get emotionally involved in a conversation, and they start to become reactive instead of responding. So suspend the reaction and concentrate on the response. And it makes it a lot easier for you to have a more effective conversation. But some of the examples that you've talked about are in the book. When you think about a pattern interrupt, they talk about the story about George W. Bush meeting Putin. And before they even start a conversation, George Bush says to Putin, "Is it true that your mother gave you a cross that had been blessed in Jerusalem?" And all of a sudden, Putin just went into, "Oh, yeah, let me tell you about that." And boom, 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 and completely separated anything that Putin was already planning on talking about with Bush. A great tactic. Ronald Reagan was notorious for taking his dignitaries on walks before they got into any type of negotiation. Fascinating on how we do that. So when we think about those pattern interrupts and we start getting into stories instead of all facts and stuff, it makes it very influential.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that the book covered was the storytelling process. Bill, can you want to go on and explain that?
It's really kind of logical. In stage one, you're separate. You've got the teller and the listener, and there's nothing connecting them. And then when you open up with, "Can I tell you a story?" this story becomes a third entity that then has a chance to connect them. And then stage three, the teller starts to tell the story and the listener starts to get more connected to them. In stage four, the listener then gets involved. Maybe they have a shared experience. You talked about that shared experience before. And so they're starting to relate to the story. And then stage five, everyone's connected now because they're all involved. Finally, the teller wraps up the story, moves out of the storytelling realm, but the story helps them, even though the story's gone now we feel a more emotional connection, just like the example you used of Putin and Bush. Now there's more of an emotional connection versus we just wanted to talk about these statistics or the thing we wanted to talk about. So I really do think that we connect to people through those stories. But the interesting thing I found, and I found this in my presentation courses, is that the more logical people are, the less they want to get involved in stories. And it's a big barrier for them. They're embarrassed by telling a story. They're embarrassed by revealing something personal. When you used, was it Mark Hurd? He told the story, something he started with, when my daughter was going to college or something like that. People don't want to reveal themselves. They're afraid to reveal themselves. And so that's something we have to be very careful of, that we aren't rejecting this because we don't want to reveal ourselves. The storytelling allows us to become connected. We talked about the vulnerability last week. The stories allow us to be vulnerable, and that vulnerability allows people to connect to us. And if we don't do that, then we're going to keep it at the statistic level, at just the facts, man, the Joe Friday thing that you were talking about.
Oh, that's so powerful. I think about how people are taught how to do something. It's, first somebody else does it and you watch, and then you do it and somebody else watches, and then you go on and you show somebody else how to do it. And you're really carrying that forward. I think about change begins with awareness. The first step of change is awareness. The second step is getting the information. The third step is applying that information. And the fourth step is internalization. But so, change begins with awareness. And I would propose that growth begins with self-awareness. And when you are self-aware of a situation, you have to become vulnerable to recognize and believe and accept that you don't know everything, which means that you need to be able to feel like there's something that needs to change and improve self-awareness and growth, and then you go out and you find the information. But if you go around thinking, I know everything, there is no change, there is no growth, there is no wonder. And if you don't have wonder, then you're not going to change what you do and what you know and what you need to learn in order to get what you want. And that's what I think, like you said, people become very fixated on being safe, not being vulnerable, and not being open to recognizing that they don't know everything. But numbers are facts. So we don't have to be able to feel vulnerable or exposed when we're just talking about facts, because that's all they are. It's just they're just facts. Next week, we're going to be covering chapter 5, which is story building, and getting into the structure and the process as to how we tell better stories. So we're doing the book, What Great Salespeople Do.
All right. Let's start into our key topic for today, although that was very important. And I think this book is really going to connect for people. We're talking about, what is your client worth? And I think this is hard for people. As you mentioned, it's hard for people to look at their clients critically. Everybody is valued on revenue. A few years ago, I was called in to help a client with a problem. They had a problem customer in Asia. They had a pretty new salesperson, and this customer was just beating up their salesperson all the time. Your product is crap. Your delivery's no good. Your product's subpar. You need to cut the prices. You need to give me a better price. And they were just beating this poor guy up. And so the owner asked me, he was gonna take a trip to Asia, and he said, "What should I do with this customer?" And I said, "Fire him." I said, "Take all of his files, put them all together, and go over there and tell him that because your product's no good, and because your delivery's no good, and because your prices aren't any good, you're going to give him the chance to go to one of your competitors." So he reported to me when he came back. He said, I tried to fire him and he wouldn't let me. He said, when I tried to fire him, he said, "No, your product is the best, your service is the best." And so then the president said, "Then here's what you're going to pay for it. And if you beat our salesperson anymore, you're done." And so he called the bluff of this customer who was just using these abusive tactics to get a better price. And they ended up having a better relationship because it was an equal relationship, not a relationship of, I can beat you up because I'm the customer. And so then that customer became valuable to them again. But the way things were going, if the price kept getting cut and they kept hammering everybody, that customer wasn't worth it to the company. Even if they had large revenue, there were other factors, Scott, that were ruining the relationship and making it more expensive to do business with them. And everything that we have that we do is a cost. So I try to help my customers take a non-biased view of their customers and determine if they should invest time and effort in these customers, who they should invest time and effort in, and maybe who they should eliminate altogether. So I want to talk about some of my criteria in doing this, and then get your feedback if you've ever done that for clients, certainly any stories that you have. So obviously the number one, I've got about 6 ranking criteria, maybe 7 that I use. Number one is historical sales. I don't think we can minimize that. How much a customer buys is important to that process, but I think that that's only one piece of it, but I think it's a major piece of it. That's why I rank it first. So we need to look at sales. A big customer that's doing, $100 million a year with us is worth more than a customer who's doing $10 million a year. You just can't fudge the numbers. And sometimes we do more. We should be doing more for those customers that have huge historical sales with us. Those are our elephants, right?
Well, let's hope that the profit is the same percentage as the revenue. Sometimes we can look at revenue and not think about profit, but yeah, I agree.
Well, we have certain things that happen, right? If we lose that $100 million a year, 100,000, whatever that, if we lose that big customer, maybe we have to close a plant down, right? Maybe we lose a lot more, and so those customers may be able to get a better discount. I think the problem that I see is that a lot of small customers want the same discount that the huge customers are getting. They want the same deal. On the reverse side, I think we see organizations that are so tied to a profitability number that they lose a deal because they're so tied to profitability that they know that they can't match in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I've had
Right.
customers who say, well, this is our profitability. Our board's forcing this profitability on it. And they start losing major deals. Well, you lose a $10 million deal because you had to have this profitability number. You don't have a chance for the next 5 years, maybe, to get that customer back.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
That's
you
so
have to
true.
weigh these things, but the sales is certainly a big factor.
More money, more revenue solves a lot of problems.
That's right. That's right. But I think
Yeah.
the other thing we have to look at, and I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this. He's got a big opportunity, but it's going to force him to hire 4 or 5 new people.
Mm-hmm.
So will that opportunity sustain itself long enough that I should hire 4 or 5 people? Sometimes saying no to a big deal is a smart thing to do because you just don't have the
Right.
resources, and it's not a long-term enough process that it's going to mean I want to keep these resources on. So to hire a
Mm-hmm.
number of people, then to have to fire them 6 months later isn't very appealing either. So sales is a big challenge. And what are they really doing, and what are their current sales? Because sometimes we overvalue a customer who used to be a really big customer, and we still have this vision in our mind that they're a big customer, but the last 3 reporting periods, they've cut down substantially in the business they're doing, and we're still giving them the same benefits.
Right,
So,
right. That's the perceived value, and salespeople looking at clients as perceived value based on revenue. And we need to reevaluate the clientele that we have to be able to look at what's the magic is in the mix. What's the
right.
perfect fit? How have our business changed as to what we're offering, and how has the market changed based on the solutions out there? And it's possible that some of the customers that we've been working with for many years, we need to leave them behind and move on to something else. But
Yeah,
that's
maybe
tough
we're
to
not a
do.
good fit anymore with what they're
Right,
buying and
right.
what we're selling. So look at that
Yep.
historical sales, but not 20 years ago. It's the last few years, perhaps. The second one I
Mm-hmm.
look at is growth potential.
Mm.
So I might have a small or medium customer that has a lot of headroom. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot more business we could be doing with them. They have a lot more products, or they have a lot more associated offices, and they're going to be valued higher in the ranking because there's growth there. I may have a customer who's the same size, but we've maxed them out, and
Mm-hmm.
there's just not a lot of growth potential there. And so they're just not going to have the same ranking as a customer that has a lot of headroom. I'm going to put more time and effort into those companies that have some headroom in them, some growth potential in them, because I want to be able to grow. So those are the companies
Mm-hmm.
I want to invest my people into.
So the third one is loyalty. So look at those customers that seem to like your company and your product and want to do more business with you. I mean, they have asked for help and they've got problems, and you're introducing you to others, and they really want to be able to build that relationship through the loyalty. And through that loyalty, you're going to be able to provide more services to them. They're going to be buying with a shorter sales cycle, and they're also going to be buying with a higher closing ratio. So the loyalty is really important. And sometimes when we look at loyalty, we need to look at our reputation in the marketplace and thinking about who are we marketing to and who's a perfect fit, so that we're attracting those customers and those prospects that are going to be buying from us and be loyal to us, not because of the marketplace and switching on price, but knowing that the best value comes from us and that we're able to grow and work with our customers and our prospects, and that builds loyalty.
Yeah, there's a big difference between a satisfied customer, right, that just does
Mm-hmm.
business with you, and a loyal customer. And a loyal customer is one, really, I think the big thing is that they're talking to you about other customers that you could work with. They're feeding other business to you. They're welcoming you perhaps to their, the things they're having. And you can just feel there's a relationship here that is built on loyalty rather than built on, okay, as long as you're doing a good job for me, we're fine. But if you make a mistake, we're gone. That's a
Mm-hmm.
satisfied customer. But a loyal
Mm-hmm.
customer says, hey, listen, I know mistakes happen. Let's figure it out together and work on this and get it working. So yeah, I would agree with you that loyalty is a big issue. I think this next one I call it servicing needs. I think this is a big one, and this is really not looked at by companies, and that is, how hard is this and expensive is this customer to do business with? Do they just do a lot of small orders, but all those orders are specialty orders? Are they really far from our warehouse? Are they in an isolated location that's 150 miles from our closest salesperson? All of those are kind of expensive. Do they have a lot of complaints, frequent returns? Kind of like the Asian customer I was talking about, that he was mad about everything all the time. He was a high service need. He wanted all kinds of service, even though he may not have been the biggest customer. And when I tell this to clients, they nod their head a lot on this one, Scott. My smallest customers are the ones who have the highest service needs. And sometimes my biggest customers are the ones that are easiest to work with.
And salespeople know it, after the second conversation, and all of a sudden they're realizing, going, oh, this is going to be a lot of work. They're asking a lot of questions. They're really getting into how the watch works versus what time it is. And I'm going to have to go through and really break down everything so that they feel like they're getting the best value.
Yeah. And they want their own color. They want their own size. They don't want to fit right into the production process, perhaps.
And sometimes prospects, customers have a great idea. They have a great product, but they don't necessarily know how to manufacture it most effectively and efficiently. And sometimes the specs can kind of throw off the pricing, and then all of a sudden it outprices itself within the marketplace. And customers don't know that. They just think they got a great idea, but the manufacturing has got to follow that to be able to make it profitable at the same time. And that's not always the case.
Yeah. So that servicing need is a big thing. Look at how expensive they are to service, rank them on that. And if they're not bringing in enough money to cause their service, then their price is going to have to go up. So you just can't do it for free. You can't, I can't tell you the number of times I've done this exercise, Scott, with clients, and they've looked and they've found out they've got 5 customers who are costing them thousands of dollars a month. They're costing them money because of their servicing and all the other factors involved, and they're losing money on them every month. And the salesperson says, but we got revenue. It's like, yeah, well, that revenue is hurting us in every imagined process. So
yeah, exactly. I think there's also another criteria, and that's suitability. And we talked a little bit earlier about a perfect fit. What is a perfect fit in a customer where you can work well together and you can collaborate together and it can be profitable for each other? And it's almost like it's not your way, it's not my way, it's a better way. So us working together is 1 + 1 = 3.
Right.
And to really be the perfect fit for our customers and the services and products that we offer.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that we know that they're going to be a tough to service on the second appointment. We know they're going to be suitable on the first appointment, right?
Right.
And they're arguing everything with us, and they don't like anything about us. I think I've used the example before. If you're not a price, if you're not the price leader in the market, and you're sitting down with a customer and all they're talking about is price, they don't care about quality, they don't care about service, run away. You're going to have a fight with that person about price forever. Chances are you're not going to convince them. You're not going to bring them to nirvana and convince them that quality is important if all they're thinking about is price. Now, there are those people out there that are happy to take your quality if they can beat you down on price. And maybe they'll still buy a higher price thing because they do see the quality, but they won't admit it to you. So those are things you have to learn as a salesperson. But that suitability, if there's not a good fit, and you've gone to a couple appointments and you're just not getting along, the chances are really good they don't value what you value. And so that's going to be a problem. All right, the next one's a big one, and that is profitability. So we talked about revenue, but if we give them too many discounts, and we're, one of my favorite stories is Sven and Ole decide that there's a hay shortage in Minnesota, and Sven and Ole decide to drive to North Dakota and buy bales of hay. So they go out to North Dakota in their truck and they buy bales of hay for $20 a piece, and they bring them back and sell them for $15. And Sven says, Ole, I think we're losing money on this deal. And Ole says, yeah, we need a bigger truck. And it's not the size of the truck. If you're losing money you increasing volume is not going to help you not lose money. You got to
Mm,
have profitability. And so I think that you have people out there, they always want a discount, they always want a deal, and they're going to beat you up on price. And if they don't understand that your business has to make a profit to stay in business, they're not going to be a good customer for you. And that goes back to, we talked about the loyalty. That loyal customer
right.
understands that you need to make a profit. They want you to stay in business. Somebody who just,
Hmm.
if give me a better price all the time. If they're not profitable, they're not a good customer. I don't care how big or how small they are, how much potential they have. If we're losing money on every deal, that's not going to be a good long-term strategy.
Yeah, I think about some of these temporary office space organizations that rent out a floor in a building, and then they rent out the offices within the floor.
Right.
And all of the tenants, the members, if you want to be calling members that rent offices, they complain about the price. Wow, it's too much. I can't do a renewal for that high. I can only do, you know, 4% and you want 6%. And all of a sudden they cave in and they accept the 4%. And if they do that over everybody, all of a sudden the rent that the owner of the business is paying to the landlord is $20,000 a month, and the revenue that they're seeking is at $18,000 a month. And they think, well, at least we've got some tenants in here, and at least
That's right.
well, yeah, but you got to be, and then when the business goes bankrupt, then all the tenants are going, "What the hell? I can't believe you did this to me!" And it's like, wait a minute, who did
Yeah,
what to who?
that's right.
I
That's
mean,
right.
you've been fighting me on price the whole time, and now here's the consequences. You ain't got an office here anymore, so go find someplace else. You really left me in the dust. It's like, no, you kept taking money out of my pocket
Yeah. Well, I
because
let you
never wanted
too,
to be
right?
there. Yeah,
I
right,
let you
exactly. It works both ways.
because I decided it was easier to keep a non-profitable tenant or customer than to go out and make new customers. And that's
Right,
what
right.
happens a lot for companies. I'm
Oh,
willing to
so
take,
true.
one thing I've understood in consulting is if I'm busy, I'm willing to charge more
Right.
than if I have nothing going on. If I got nothing
Mm,
going on, then probably my price gets more flexible. But if I'm busy, I'm like, screw you. I don't need to drop my price
right.
to nothing.
Right.
I have standards to maintain. So profitability is a difficult one, but if you're not making a profit on that customer, be careful. What's the next one,
Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah. Yeah. I think financial reliability. Is this customer going to pay? Are they going to follow through? Are you going to be a lender? I mean, and sometimes vendors are lenders.
Right.
And we're seeing this right now in the marketplace when it comes to commercial buildings, where some people have been, not paying rent for a year or 2 years because their employees are not coming to the office, and they're feeling like, you know what? Why are we paying for an office? I just want to get out of the lease. So they just stop paying. And the landlord says, no, you've got a lease and you got to keep paying. All of a sudden, boom, the building ends up going into foreclosure because there's not enough revenue, because for some reason we're not selling to the right prospect or customer or tenant to be able to be profitable.
Or we
And
didn't go find a new one.
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's so important. I mean, you bring up a really good point, Bill, about some of our sales reps that have blended roles where they're an account manager and the sales rep. And what happens is a sales rep has to go out and get the business, and then they have to manage the business. Well, they get to a point where they've got such a book of business that they're just concentrating on managing and fulfilling the services and getting a commission off of everything, when the business owner should hire a customer service person to handle that, and make sure that the salespeople are out there with the skill set and the talent and the network that they have and the experience to go out and sell and get more new clients
Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah. If
But
they're
I
not
mean,
paying,
it's
they're not
natural.
worth anything.
Right. Yeah,
So,
exactly. So look at client acquisition and client servicing. I
yeah.
think they're really two blended roles,
All
or
right.
two
Excellent.
separate, not a blended role. Yeah.
All right. The
Anyway.
last one I have is potential longevity. And that
Mm-hmm.
is, nothing lasts forever, and neither do businesses. As they're starting to lower down, and they don't look like they're a long-term prospect, then maybe you need to go out and find new business. And we have
Mm.
businesses that close. We have businesses that are, they start losing business. They can't afford you anymore. You've got to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in order to really understand, is this going to be a long-term customer for me, or is this customer on the short list? As you said, they're not paying their bills anymore. They're on the short list. Get out there, get
Right.
some new business, and quit acting like, I can't find a new business. You got to find new business. And that's a lot easier than trying to, what did somebody say? It's easier to give birth than to raise the dead. So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
so if that customer's dying, go out and give birth, find a new
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And I think that this is really breaking out of our own comfort zone and looking at how the marketplace changes. I did this a couple of 2 or 3 years ago. When I was doing presentations, I would say, has anybody been to Sears.com in your entire life? Have you ever been to Sears.com? And there's not a hand that goes up. What happened to Sears? Their customers died and they did not get any new ones because a lot of customers buy through the internet. If you don't have a website and you don't offer that, you're not evolving as the buying habits change within your consumers. You will be out of business.
Do you know that Sears had one? Do you know that Sears had one of the first .coms? They had one of the first websites. Yes,
the Prodigy. Prodigy.com.
They were very early on having a customer website, but they never advertised it. They never did anything with it. They screwed it up. It wasn't well done. And so but they were one of the early adopters on that. But they were so focused on their financial part that they didn't pay enough attention to things. So we have to change as the times change. Look at your customer base, really do some examination. I'm just going to recap these areas. Historical sales, growth potential, loyalty, servicing needs, suitability, profitability, financial reliability, and potential longevity. Those are some of those criteria that you can put in to see, is this customer worth it? And if it's not, you can invite them either to fix it by paying more or leave. And if they pay more, they might move up the scale, but you got to look at that. You probably have a lot of what I call D. If you put them A, B, C, D, you got a few D customers out there that are costing you money, have no potential, and invite them to go to your competition and let your competition lose money on them instead of you. So,
yeah.
All right. So what do we got? What do we got going on here for our golden nugget, Scott? A
golden nugget. Here's a quote. The very reason I write is so that I might not sleepwalk through my entire life. Sodie Smith, an author. And I brought that up because it's just so important to be able to document and write and be creative and have a journal, have a diary, have something that you can look forward to writing in and then seeing the growth that you have over time.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do end up sleepwalking through our lives. At times, I've certainly been guilty of just amusing myself rather than doing the hard work. But when you do the hard work, you feel better about yourself. So and whether it's writing or whatever,
write down stories. And that's the reason why the quote really appealed to me is that, have you ever met to our listeners, have you met anybody that just has an endless amount of stories? Guess what? They've told those stories hundreds of times, and they have hundreds of stories, but they have to first start by writing them all down and remembering them.
That's right.
After they live them.
Right.
We all live stories. We need to write them down so we remember them.
All right. As we wrap up things, I want you to go to winningatselling.com, winningatselling.com. That's our show notes. We have a page for each of our shows. So you can learn a little bit more about it. So go to winningatselling.com.
This is episode 552. What a great topic, Bill. I'm just very intrigued by that concept. So thanks for bringing that up. Next week, we're going to be talking about chapter 5, story building, out of the book, What Great Salespeople Do. The topic is going to be revenue versus expenses. And this is a typical P&L sheet. But what I really want to talk about is some salespeople that say, I'm not getting paid enough, and I'm not going to spend money on that. So really looking at the mindset of investing in your future and listening to people complain about stuff is really fascinating as to where they're focused on. So we'll talk more about that.
So subscribe, share the podcast with your colleagues, get it on your social media. If you want to reach out to Scott and I on LinkedIn, we're happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.